You good? All right, y'all ready to start? All right, here we go. We got 8 weeks of this. All right, I'm going to open in prayer, and we'll get into a brief introduction, and then we'll get into the main heart of what we're going to be talking about. Lord, we come before you. We ask that as we gather here, that you would be with us, that you would speak to our hearts and our minds, and that we would see you clear. And we ask this in your name, amen. All right. I do want to say at the beginning, thank you for giving me a try. I know I didn't explain it as well as I wanted to. So I'm going to try to give you the explanation more now. This is from a book that has the same title, Seculosity, that this is a really ugly book, and I lost the jacket to it because I was reading this book when COVID happened. And so, oh, there it is. So it's been a long time in the coming. I was planning this study when COVID happened, and it was kind of, 3 years out. So what we're looking at is the idea of busyness, which I gave you a bit of that. But I do want you to know that the author of this book is a guy named David Zahl. And he is the seminary that I went to. His father was the dean. His father's name is Paul Zahl. And Paul has 3 sons. And all 3 sons are involved in full-time ministry. David is a priest, works at a church. John Zahl was in the Diocese of South Carolina when I was in the Diocese of South Carolina. That's the youngest, I believe. And then they have Simeon Zahl. And so, it's kind of a whole clan that they have. And they kind of have a following in their own distinct theology. And so when I was in seminary, they called them Zahlites. I was not particularly one of them, but I am sympathetic to their theology. But David is the founder of Mockingbird Conference, which is a nationwide conference. And on that board is Todd Brewer, who is Bishop Gregg's son, who is a PhD from Duke Divinity. And so this is a group that's been in the diocese. They're friendly with the diocese quite a bit. He has written several books. The one that we're looking at, I figured out how to teach from a book. I basically take an idea from each chapter and I expand on that idea instead of trying to do the book, because I can't do the book. But he has a new book coming out, which I highly commend to you. It's called Low Anthropology. And it's basically about looking at other people through a lens of grace because of a low anthropology. Basically meaning that you don't expect much from humanity, so you have grace. But that's kind of the introduction to David Zahl. So one of the most, I think, overlooked and underappreciated kind of features of any religion, but particularly Christianity, is the idea that it provides intrinsic value, meaning, and purpose to your life. Without you doing anything, those things come as a part of it. And it's one of those components that Christianity provides, is that every human being has intrinsic value. Every human being has worth. They have meaning and purpose in their life simply because we are created in the image of God. We don't have to do anything to have value, worth, meaning, and purpose. We have it by nature as a part of who we are because we're created in the image of God. So that's, one of the main premises to this. It's very similar to the idea of hope in the sense that it's overlooked and underappreciated. Is that nobody is super grateful that they have hope until they don't have hope. And then you realize what hopelessness feels like. And the moment that you realize that, you realize the value of having hope. That what hope means to us is so important as human beings. The same thing with having intrinsic value. The fact that you are worth something despite or without anything that you do or produce is highly important. The fact that you matter. The fact that every other person in this room has value and worth matters. And so it's only when those things like hope and intrinsic value are stripped away that you realize how important those things actually are, just to our psyche, to our ability to function. We realize that those things matter because we want to know that we have value, that we mean something. Value because you're created in the image of God. That's the foundational idea behind this, is that you have value simply because God created you. Any questions on that? Because it's important that you grasp this or the rest of it won't make sense. Meaning and purpose is that God has a purpose for you. And you'll hear people bring this up in conversation where, they might not necessarily put it in those terms, but they'll say something like, I know that there's a purpose for me in this. I know that there's something here for me. There's this longing, this looking for it. But as Christians, you and I have it intrinsically. We don't have to earn it. We don't have to work for it. It's just there. It's a part of who we are. So, I get, this is a cover of a book, and, the title of the book is Life Has No Meaning Until You Create It. That's the opposite of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is you don't have to create it. It exists intrinsically within you. And so that's the first part of this. Now, when you take that idea and you move it into a culture that is shifting away from traditional religion, what that does is it causes a cultural crisis where we have to figure out culturally as well as individually where we're going to find meaning, value, and purpose. Because if God isn't the source, then where do we find that? And this is what you see. Now, obviously, for you and I that are Christians, we don't have this crisis going on. But for a world in which you have 3 generations that largely define themselves as non-religious, what they're facing now is a crisis of how do I find meaning, purpose, and value in life? Essentially, that they've realized that when you take religion out of it, you've also taken intrinsic value out. So now you don't have that. Where do you find it? Where do you find meaning, value, and purpose? And so even though you and I still have intrinsic value, meaning, and purpose because we're Christians and we believe that, you and I will still fall into doing this. And you'll see this kind of over and over again. It's interesting. So in essence, where will we as a society look to gauge value, meaning, and purpose of an individual's life? So we will do it in our own life, but we will also do it in other people's lives. We will try to gauge value, meaning, and purpose in their life. It's not intrinsic, when you remove God from it. So where is it? And as individuals, how will we be able to determine our own value of our own life? So it causes this little bit of a crisis. And that crisis comes out in an interesting kind of way that you'll all relate to, I think. So over the next 8 weeks, we're going to look at 8 different areas that are currently being used to provide the culture a way to gauge value, meaning, and purpose. So that's what we're going to look at the next 8 weeks. This week, we're going to look at busyness. We're going to look at the topic of busyness. And we're going to look, when we look at each one of these, we're going to be looking at what is being used to provide meaning, purpose, and value. How is it being provided? Why is it failing to provide it? Because all of these are failing tremendously. And what are the consequences of those failures? What's the consequence of busyness not being able to provide that? So, week 1, busyness. If you ask somebody how they're doing, chances are you're going to get some sort of response that has busy in it. Over and over again, you will hear this. Maybe the response is, I'm doing well, been really, really busy. Sometimes they will just say, busy. Sometimes they will say, doing well, got a lot going on. There are many ways to communicate that you are busy. And you hear it over and over again. It used to be just, I'm doing well. But what you see recently, and by recently I mean, the last 50, 60, 70 years, is this incorporating the idea of I'm very busy. And it's getting more and more and more and more like that to where you get to our culture today and it's just busy. I'm busy. Now, is that accurate? Have you heard that? When you ask people how you doing, have you gotten that response? Do you use that response? I can't tell you how many times I've used that response. Super busy. Super duper busy. Been keeping myself busy. Any number of things. Got a lot going on. I use it in a variety of ways. Been really busy.
Crisis coming. Look busy.
Yes. Yes. So over and over again, you get that response, and it is across all segments. It's young and old, it's single, it's married, it's kids, no kids. Let me pause on that. I used to say that if you don't have kids, I don't want to hear how busy you are. I don't say that anymore. And part of it is what I'm talking about today, because that's not necessarily a good barometer for busyness. White, black, rich, poor, urban, rural, working, retired. This busyness has come to describe people that live in Western culture, no matter what category you fall in. It's across the board. It's not just, married people or rich people or working people. It's across the board. How are you doing? Busy. And so, as a society and as individuals, we have become very busy. And it's just a part of what we've become. And this is why I don't say that anymore, because if you don't have kids, you will fill your life with other busyness. Other things will, all of us are busy because we're filling it. And yet, as much as we will complain and wish that we were less busy, we would never want that. And the reason that we wouldn't want it is because we're terrified of what not being busy would communicate to the people around us about us. We're also terrified of how we would view ourselves if we weren't busy. If I didn't have a lot going on, what does that say about me? What would my neighbors think about me? What would, people at church think about me if I didn't have all of this going on? Because busyness reassures us that we have value, that you have value, purpose, and meaning. How do I know that I have those? Because I'm busy, because I'm doing a lot of things, because if I'm not there, I will be missed. The busyness has created the value, purpose, and meaning. So, simple conversation. You go up to somebody you haven't seen for a while. You go up to Jim and you say, Jim, how are you doing? I haven't seen you for a while. And Jim's response is good. Ben's super busy, but good. What Jim is communicating to you right off the bat is I'm valuable. I'm important. I matter. I have meaning and purpose in my life. Why? Because I'm busy. This is why we use this all the time. And you know that it's true because it works with bosses, and we all did it when we had a boss. Your boss doesn't come into your cubicle or into your room or wherever and say, how's it going? And you say, I ain't got nothing to do. What do you say? I've been super busy. I'm valuable. I'm important. I matter. You need me. You can't do without me. The problem is what we've done is we've moved that, we shift that into everyday culture. And so now, just in meeting people, we immediately communicate, I'm very busy, which means I'm valuable, I'm important, I matter. I have purpose and meaning. And he begins to talk about whenever somebody begins to talk about their busyness. So a lot of times it's not just, I'm super busy. A lot of times it's, I'm busy. I've been doing this and I'm involved in this area I picked up. And what they're doing is they're giving you their resume of value. I'm not just valuable, I'm this valuable. I do all of this. And so because I do all of this, I have value, meaning, and purpose. I matter, because I'm involved in all of this. And so this weird phenomenon that has kind of taken place in our culture where busyness now is something that ascribes value to our lives. And so that's the basic idea behind it. And when I looked at my own conversations and I tried to be critical of myself and my own communication with people, that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, I can't speak for you because there are 8 of these, remember? And you're not going to fit into every one of these categories. But I'm thinking that you're probably going to be able to identify to some regard in each of these categories. It may not be your go-to, but I do this all the time. I communicate to people that I'm important. Why? Because I'm busy. If I wasn't busy, then I wouldn't be important. Or at least I'm afraid that that's what you would think. So, thoughts on that? Jim? What name? Jim. It's because I thought of you. And I thought Jim does this all the time. I think it's one of the most common names, so I just shot it in there. Rebecca.
You didn't put Brit or
Ted. Trust me, I thought of Brit and Ted. Rebecca.
It's actually creeping into our kids as well, which is really crazy, because the other day Porter said to me, you and Dad were out working on the farm, whatever we call it, and you know what I did? I organized the couch, Mom, because I saw you working and I didn't want to feel lazy.
Oh my.
So if we're demonstrating that in our language and our behavior, and our children are picking up on it and trying to emulate what they think value is associated with.
I know
I wasn't upset that he did something in the past, to be honest.
Yeah, I know that I'm teaching against this, but can Porter talk to my kids?
It's just the way he decided that his value was associated with doing something because other people were, not because he felt good about helping, not because he knew that he had a chore to do. It was because others around him were just demonstrating value. He felt the need to demonstrate value.
Yep. Yeah, it'll certainly, I mean, it gets younger and younger and younger. Cohen tells me he's busy all the time, mostly because he knows that I'm going to give him something to do. If he's not. Leslie.
To just build on what Rebecca said, we're forcing that on our children also. I don't know how many times I have heard parents say to their children, make yourself useful.
As well as ornamental.
Yeah, but it's make yourself useful, because if you're not doing something, you're useless.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we have busied their schedules beyond belief. And so what we're doing is, it's the same idea. What we're doing is we're trying to make our children valuable. Who are we making them valuable to? Universities. Universities said we want well-rounded students that are involved in a lot of things. So parents said, okay, I have to get my children involved in a lot of things, because if they're not valuable, and I need them to be valuable so that they'll get into a certain university. Billy.
We passed this along, I think. I just recently did a eulogy of a friend, and my parting advice to the widow who is an artist was hurry up and get the gallery open and get back to work.
Well, there's some good wisdom there. And everybody goes through this differently. But for some people, it is very helpful to get back into what you're doing as, just a way to not despair. So I wouldn't beat yourself up over that too much, because there's some good wisdom there as well. But yeah, back to Rebecca.
So I actually read the book too, because I'm a nerd like that. But the author really points out that we all fall into the traps, whether we're Christian or not, and to be self-critical. So I have to say that a lot of the stuff that I am reading has been like the most therapeutic, difficult, eye-opening part of my life in the recent, well, I read it in one day, but again, I'm a nerd.
Did you have that much time?
I was so busy. I actually felt the most valuable in that lazy looking moment, because I took a lot out of the actual reading of the book in that reason.
It is, all 8 of these categories are very challenging, because you can see yourself in it. And even though you have intrinsic value tied to God, and you don't need to find value, meaning, and purpose outside, we still do, because we swim in this culture. And this culture, this is embedded into the fabric of the culture, and it seeps into us. So you'll be able to see this in you. It changed the way that I have conversations with people. It certainly made it so that I try not to say that anymore. And I still find myself saying that, particularly to people that I really want to know that I'm busy. But I do find myself doing it. But the other thing is I listen to people's differently. Like, people say this to me all the time. Okay, so I got it. You're valuable. You have meaning. It changes how you engage and enter into conversations. This is why I kept saying, give me a chance on this, because it does impact us. Bev.
I too came from one of those hyperactive environments, and I'm just such a perfect example of adult attention deficit, I think. But I know that I created that in many respects. But an older, much wiser friend, much older and wiser friend, told me about 35 years ago. She looked at me and she said, it's hard to take those personal inventories, but you don't have to do it alone, because it's much more important that you're a human being than a human doing. Yeah. And I always remember those words.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really what we're talking about. As you're a human being created in the image of God, but we live in a culture where your value is tied to what you do, which moves me right to the next slide, which it gets to the idea of performancism, which is that what we do is who we are. So, and you'll see this all the time. People will ask you, what do you do? And what they want to know is, who are you? And you tell people, I'm a doctor. Is that all that you are? All that you are is a doctor? Like, there's much more to you than just being a doctor. That's what you do. It's not who you are. And so, but what we've done is we've tied who we are to what we do. And what I do defines who I am. And if that's the case, then we all have measurable value. And that measurable value, there's variance in there. And some of us are more valuable than others. Do you see the society that we live in? There are people that are more valuable than other people because it's based on performancism. What you do is your value. So if you are a doctor, you are more valuable than the garbage man. And so this is the culture that we live in. It's different in Christianity because the doctor and the garbage man are both equally created in the image of God. And they have equal value in that. But in our society, it's based on what you do. Billy?
To get less busy and less busy. Does this mean if I'm successful, I'll be worthless?
It's a really good point, and I actually address this. This is why people can't retire in our culture. The moment that you retire, you are immediately, culturally, considered less valuable. You have less meaning and less purpose. In our culture, you are to some extent expendable. And because when meaning or value or purpose is tied to what we do, and now you do less. So what people do is they get another job. What people do is they fill their time with other things that will give them value. I remember when my father retired. And my father worked his whole life for one company, 40 years. And when he retired, like maybe 6 months into it, he said to me, I don't know how I had time to work. And the reason that he said that was because he had so filled his life with other things to provide meaning, purpose, and value in his life. Because he became very uncomfortable with the idea of being retired. Retired means I don't do anything. And how do I reconcile that? How do I live into that? And so he filled his life. Because society says you're less valuable because you don't do anything, you don't contribute. Even though you've contributed for 40 years, somebody who has just started contributing for 1 year is considered more valuable. Because value is tied to what you do. What are you doing? And so it's the idea of performancism. That's where I get that's ultimately where I get my value. Therefore, if you're busy, you're more important. You have value. Your life has meaning and purpose. And in fact, the busier you are, the more value and purpose you have in your life. So if life slowed down or your busyness dwindled, your value dwindles as well. And so you have to keep up by adding things that provide value. So it's a failing system, though, because what happens is we get crushed under the weight of trying to measure up. and you're going to see this in a variety of ways. But oftentimes, what you have is people can't stay retired. They just get other jobs. And so we've already talked about a lot of that. You make yourself busy. But it really gets exacerbated in social media. This is where it really becomes problematic. Because you're going to go on social media, you're going to go on Facebook, you're going to go on Instagram, whatever social media you use, and you're going to go on there and you're going to scroll through your feed, yeah? And as you're scrolling through your feed, what you're seeing is each person's resume of their value over and over and over and over and over again. And you're going to think, look what they're doing. Look what they're involved in. Look at all the ways in which they have value. And then you're going to look at your own life and you're going to realize that you don't measure up. Because their value on social media is not a picture of reality, just like yours isn't. What you post on social media are the highlights, right? Yeah, you don't post doing a puzzle, do you? Completed a puzzle? I hope not. Please don't. I know people put pictures of their last food that they had up there. It drives me nuts. But, Bishop Greg does this. But when Bishop Greg does it, it's at this fancy restaurant with this food castle that you've never seen in your life. And you're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And that's different from somebody posting their Arby's, like, look at my roast beef and cheese. Like, that's a little bit, so when you're going through the feed gives you the highlights, and then what we end up doing is comparing our real life with this image of their life and thinking, well, my life doesn't measure up. I don't have as much value as they do. And social media becomes very problematic in this regard because it creates a false image. And you go through and over and over and over again. I know because I'm on Facebook and I'm on other social media, not very much. But when I go through, I look at your lives and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I've never been there. I've never seen that. I've never done that. My life's horrible. But other people do it. Am I alone? Jim?
When I said I never felt that way, but I am busy all the time, but it's doing things I want to do. I ride 3 hours a day, I swim, I read books that I didn't have time to read, I see my all of those things are changed with retirement, but yeah, I'm still busy. But, are you saying that's equivalent in determining my self-value?
One of the important things to take away from this is that there are 8 of these. And each one of us falls into these categories on different levels. And so I am in no way saying every one of you is worshiping at the temple of busyness. In no way. But some of us are.
Isn't a lot of it, not self-induced, but society-driven? Right. Because like you said about the university and about, all those kinds of things. Our kids' lives are way busier and more stressful than mine ever was.
To provide value.
Yeah, just to survive.
Competing.
Just to survive.
Keep up with the Joneses, depending on where you're...
Only to survive the way that you think, or the way that society told you is valuable. Going to Harvard is not survival.
A lot of it's externally driven.
There are many universities you can get into, and nobody actually cares where you go except for very few jobs that they actually care what university you went to. But we have this idea that, well, if my son or daughter goes to this university, well, what ideas do we have attached to that? They'll have more value. They have more value than somebody who went to Florida State. And somebody who went to Florida State has more value than somebody that went to Eastern. And somebody that didn't go to college, well, they have less value than somebody that went to Eastern. And so we have this value system that we buy into, and so much of our society, yes, our society drives it, but so much of it is about ascribing value. Who has value? Who matters and who doesn't? Whereas within Christianity, you have intrinsic value attached to you. And so it's a different lens, but I'm in no way saying that all of us fill our time and are consumed by being busy, but this is something that is taking place culturally. You can see it in the lives of people all around you, and many of you will be able to identify it in your own life. Next week, we're going to talk about romance. Maybe that's your issue. Yes?
Not that one either.
Building on what Jim said,
I'm sorry.
is there a difference in in your busyness, whether you're doing it for yourself or for your image?
Well, I mean...
And what kind of busyness? Like he's saying he goes walking or cycling or swimming or whatever. I'm not busy. I'm never busy. I can always make time for something. But,
Yeah.
So I'm not proud of being busy.
That's the day what you do.
She's asked to know what you need a volunteer for.
I can make you busy, Ken.
She's got time.
And things like that. I mean, I volunteer, but it's not to keep me busy. It's because I'm doing something I like to do.
Yeah, so
But it's not. And it's
First of
also
all-
not for what somebody else thinks.
let me just say this. I do not think that we know ourselves nearly as well as we think that we do. And so many of us think, well, I'm busy, but I'm busy because I want to be. Perhaps, and that's very much that's very much in the realm of possibility. You may very well fit that category, but you also may fit the category of I'm busy because I think this is what I want, but it's actually what society told me that I should want. And I've been told that I should want this so much that I actually think that I want this. It's an idea. Leslie.
Sorry, Leslie.
I just had an aha moment. I'm thinking about the elderly or people who, because of illness, can no longer do the things that they used to do. And I just had this moment where I realized that part of the problem, just in my own life with my own husband, is that he no longer feels valuable as a person.
Yep.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and when that happens, and this goes back to what I was saying to Kay, is that we do not know ourselves as well as we think that we do. They can't actually communicate that to you because they don't have the words to communicate it, because they don't understand what's taking place in themselves. But they're feeling it, and you're dealing with the ramifications of it because they feel like they don't have value. My dad my dad had dementia and Alzheimer's and the whole works, early onset and long 8 years, and he would yell at me all the time when I tried to do something for him, or whenever I would correct him, or when I would challenge him on something. And for years we didn't know that he was suffering with this, but what he was doing was that he felt as though he did not have value. And I was reaffirming that every time I did those things, and he would lash out at me because he had lost so much. But it's not just the elderly, it's when people lose their job. When a husband comes home and he no longer has his job, his value is lost. And I say husbands, and it can be wives as well, but as men, it's been ingrained in us, and it's a part of who we are, that we are providers. And the moment that we can't do that, we do not have value in our own mind. And so you see it there. You can see it we already brought up our children, social media, just normal conversations with people. It's a resume. I am valuable. I'm important. And it goes throughout all segments of society.
So in some instances, it's value to yourself, if you
Yes.
will, because retirement, I'm happy as a clam being home by myself, stitching and reading. I have classical music. I am as happy as a clam.
Yeah, and some people will. Like, I have so many hobbies that like, if I retired now, I'm good. I'm good.
If I lost my sight, then it would be a different thing, because I couldn't stitch. So you're
Yes.
saying it's almost value to yourself too, not only to society, but to yourself.
Yeah, it's how society views you, but how you view yourself as well. Your self-worth is wrapped up in this. And if society views you positively, then you will in turn view yourself positively. But when society views you negatively, you tend to take on that negative image of yourself. And when you can't do what you used to be able to do, then that self-image comes back on. The idea of busyness is, again, there's 8 of these, the value is no longer based on God as the creator of human life. And so what it does is it creates measurable value. And this is the last point that I really want to drive home. That means that you can determine somebody's value over another. And you'll see this play out over and over again in our society. You ever had a conversation with somebody, and maybe you were the one, where you lamented the fact that we're keeping criminals alive in prison? And the argument always goes back to, you know how much it costs to keep them alive in prison? Essentially what we're saying is that it's not worth the cost. That the value that they have is not worth the cost. But switch that around to they have intrinsic value. They're created in the image of God. Even though it's a broken image, they're created in the image of God. It's a very different understanding of humanity. It's a very different way of looking out at people and gauging who they are, because now value is relative just to who you are in God and not what you do or what you've done. And anytime value becomes measurable, it means you can become more valuable than somebody else. It also means you can become less valuable than somebody else. And so where we're at, and this is why this is so important, this is why everybody gives you their resume up front, letting you know that I'm valuable, because they need you to know that of all of their value. Like, I need you to know not just that I'm valuable, but I do all of these things so that you can accurately place me on the scale value-wise.
Yeah, the more you talk, the more I realize that what I was saying wasn't really accurate. For the past 10 years, it's been an evolution to this point. Is that natural that as people leave their jobs and move into retirement, that it becomes less and less and less? Is that more the norm that your resume becomes more of, I just am, as opposed to what I do?
I would want to say that it's different for each person. So some people can't retire. No matter how hard they try, they can't retire. They're always trying to regain that value, that meaning, that purpose in their life. Some people ride off into the sunset and could care less what anybody else cares about them because they've had to care for 40 years and they're done caring. And so it just depends on, what kind of person you are.
Well, and I can remember when I first first involuntarily retired, you know, it was shattering, and it was who am I and what value do I bring and all that kind of stuff, and it led me to certain things, but those were less of that, and now it's gotten to the point 10 years on where I'm in that, you know, what's important to me is people who I have in my life and that kind of thing, not what I did externally.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, you know, once retirement happens, they're okay. I'm done caring because I'm out of that stage of my life. But for a lot of people, coming to terms with that idea, because it's a very real idea in our culture, is that those that are retired, those that are older, are less valuable. Commercials are not marketed towards you. They're just not. They're not trying to reach you anymore. You got me there. Okay. So maybe that one and some Rogaine and, you know, anything else you want to shoot in there. Billy.
That's for prostate issues.
There's a situation where retirement becomes mandatory because of age, and you're financially not ready to retire, you know, like the DC-10 captain with 3 wives and 5 kids in college, and suddenly they can't fly anymore. He needs the money, so he has to get another job.
Yeah, there are certain occupations where you will see this quite a bit, and the military is one of them. Clergy is another one. You look around the diocese, you've got tons of clergy that cannot retire. And basically, the occupations where you have high value, those occupations, when people walk away from those, they have a hard time walking away because now they don't have that value attached to them. And they need to get that back. Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm finding the opposite true in my line of work, where we've spent decades telling people, oh, you just want to be a burger flipper?
Yeah.
I can't hire cooks. I can throw every dollar I have at them and they still won't come to work because the society has told them, we did it 3 years ago with essential businesses, society has told people that work in certain industries have less value than if they go to work in another industry. We've done this without realizing it for years.
Yeah, and we all know that certain occupations hold more value in our eyes than other occupations. The problem is that when that person becomes the occupation, now the person has more value than the other person. Even though it's just a job, it becomes, the job is who you are now. And so who you are is, I'm a doctor. Oh, you're a doctor. You are of more value than this person who flips burgers. But yeah, so what I would say, I'm going to grab Randy, and then what I would say, because I've got to wrap this up, is look over the next week, in your normal conversations with people, take note of every time people say, I'm busy. Think about it. But more importantly, think about every time you say it. And you will say it. And what are you communicating? What are you trying to communicate whenever you say, I'm busy? Randy.
Well, your example of a doctor being more valuable than the garbage man, if you think about it, you know, the garbage man and people that work in the sewers, they make our civilization possible. Okay, whereas the doctor just treats us individually. So I would say the garbage man is more valuable than the doctor as well.
Yeah, you take away the garbage man, and you're going to be hurting real quick. If there are no garbage men in the world, you will see a society flounder pretty fast. But we do have a cultural idea of what positions have more value than other positions, even if they're false. And because being a garbage man does not have high regard because it's a dirty job, there is culturally that is of great importance. Yes, yeah, certainly. Okay, any last questions before I wrap this up? It's been fun. Think about all the times that you say busyness. Think about all the times that people are telling you how busy they are. And next week is the idea of romance. Finding your value, your meaning, your purpose in romance. That's a fun one. It is.